Have you ever wondered why some of the smartest people you know suddenly start believing things that make no sense? Why intelligent, educated, even compassionate individuals can become defenders of ideas that hurt others, sometimes even themselves? You might think the problem is ignorance, or maybe corruption, but what if it's something far more terrifying? Dietrich Bonhoeffer once wrote, "Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor force can touch it. Arguments fall on deaf ears." He wasn't talking about people with low intelligence. He was talking about something deeper, more insidious, more human, a force that doesn't just make us wrong, but makes us feel right while we're doing wrong. This is not just a philosophical curiosity. It might be the single greatest threat to modern civilization, because stupidity, the kind Bonhoeffer describes, is not the absence of thinking. It's the surrender of thinking. And here's the terrifying part. It doesn't happen to other people. It happens to people just like you, just like me. Think about this. A celebrated doctor starts spreading conspiracy theories about vaccines. A respected journalist begins parroting propaganda without even realizing it. A loving parent refuses life-saving treatment for their child because of something they saw online. These aren't bad people. They're not crazy or uneducated. They're victims of what Bonhoeffer called functional stupidity, and it's a threat more dangerous than evil itself. Because evil always carries the seeds of its own destruction. It creates resistance, discomfort, the instinct to fight back. But stupidity feels comfortable. Stupidity feels right. Stupidity tells you, you're one of the good guys. And that's what makes it so dangerous. It's not malice, it's certainty, it's not chaos. It's order without thought, and worst of all, it spreads. Not like a virus, like silence. Like a room where everyone's nodding and no one's asking questions. Bonhoeffer lived through this. He watched Germany, a nation of poets and philosophers, descend into barbarism. Not because people were evil, but because they stopped thinking. They surrendered their minds to slogans, to fear, to comfort. And if you think that couldn't happen again, look around. The pressure to conform has never been higher. The complexity of the world has never felt more overwhelming. And the systems we live in, our politics, our platforms, our economies, they reward not those who think, but those who react, those who feel certain, those who stop questioning. And that raises a question I need you to hold on to. When was the last time you believed something simply because everyone around you did? Not because you thought about it, not because you challenged it, but because it was easier that way. If you can't think of a time, that might be the most dangerous sign of all, because the first symptom of intellectual surrender is believing it's something that happens to other people. So before we go further, pause. Ask yourself honestly, what's one belief you've never questioned? What's one thing you're absolutely certain of that might not survive real scrutiny? Because that's where we begin, not with outrage, not with judgment, but with curiosity, with the courage to ask hard questions, even when it hurts, even when it costs us something, even when we'd rather be left alone. That Bonhoeffer believed was the first act of resistance, the refusal to go numb, the refusal to be puppeted, the quiet, radical act of keeping your mind awake. And in the next section, we'll meet someone who forgot how to do that. Not a villain, not a fool, but someone who reminds us how easy it is to lose our minds and how hard it is to get them back. If this made you pause, even for a moment, drop a comment, "Still thinking," because that simple act could be the first step in resisting the most dangerous force in the world. He wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to fall for it. He had degrees from prestigious universities, published papers, held a reputation for intellectual rigor. In every conversation, he was the one people turned to for clarity. He believed in science, in logic, in truth. And then, something changed. It started subtly. A few YouTube videos, a Facebook post shared by an old friend. A growing sense that maybe the official story didn't quite add up. He wasn't irrational. He just had questions. And slowly, those questions became beliefs. He began dismissing mainstream sources as biased. He started citing obscure studies that no peer-reviewed journal would touch. He stopped talking with colleagues who disagreed. He stopped listening to anyone who challenged his new worldview. He didn't lose his intelligence. He surrendered it to the quiet seduction of certainty, to the comfort of a group that told him he was brave for thinking differently. He didn't know it, but he joined a new kind of movement, not one defined by ideology, but by resonance, by the emotional reward of belonging, of having an answer, of being awake in a world full of sheep. And here's the terrifying part. He was still convinced he was seeking the truth. He still saw himself as rational. What had really changed was invisible. He stopped asking questions that cost something. He started believing things that felt good, rather than things that made sense. This is how functional stupidity spreads, not with dramatic conversions, but with subtle compromises. It happens in comfortable living rooms, not battlefields. In shared videos, not secret meetings. It rewards emotional conviction and punishes quiet doubt. And it turns some of the brightest minds into blind believers, not because they're evil, but because they're exhausted, because they're overwhelmed, because deep down they're afraid. Afraid that the world is more chaotic than they can handle. That truth is more complicated than they can bear. That maybe they don't have all the answers after all, and so they choose the feeling of knowing over the discipline of thinking. They choose comfort over complexity. It's easy to point fingers, to say, that could never be me. But that's the most dangerous thought of all, because the scientist in this story, he's not a villain. He's not even an outlier. He's a mirror held up to all of us. Who've ever clicked share without reading deeply, who've ever dismissed an uncomfortable fact because it challenged our narrative, who've ever felt the warmth of a crowd and stayed silent even when something felt wrong. Bonhoeffer warned us about this. He said that stupidity is not a psychological defect, but a sociological disease. It doesn't arise from within the individual, but from the environment around them. When people are isolated, stressed, or immersed in groupthink, stupidity takes root like mold in a damp house. It isn't loud, it's silent. It doesn't scream, it nods, it repeats, and it slowly removes the part of us that says, wait, is this really true? So here's the question I want you to ask. Where in your life have you stopped questioning because it was easier not to? Not because you're stupid, but because the cost of thinking felt too high. That's where it starts. Not with propaganda, but with fatigue. Not with evil, but with surrender. And if we don't confront it, we risk becoming like the scientist, still brilliant, still respected, still thinking, but only in one direction. Still alive, but no longer awake. If this story made you think of someone or of yourself, comment, I've seen this before. Because recognizing the pattern is the first step in breaking it. He was born into comfort, a world of ideas, conversation, music echoing through quiet German halls. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wasn't raised by radicals or revolutionaries. He was the son of a psychiatrist, the brother of academics, the product of a cultured society that believed deeply in the power of reason. Germany in the early 20th century was not a place of ignorance. It was the land of Bach, Beethoven, and Kant, of universities filled with philosophers and theologians, and for a time Bonhoeffer believed that was enough. That education, that civility, that truth would protect society from madness. But he was wrong, and he realized it far too late. He watched in disbelief as professors, men he admired, began to praise Adolf Hitler. He heard pastors from the pulpit declare allegiance not to God, but to the Führer. He watched friends, neighbors, mentors quietly adjust their convictions to fit the times. He saw reason collapse, and in its place came slogans, came silence, came violence. At first, Bonhoeffer responded the way a scholar would. He wrote, he preached, he pleaded for rational discourse, for moral clarity, for the church to resist, but resistance was not what the world wanted. They wanted order, simplicity, a story that made them feel safe, even if it wasn't true. And so Bonhoeffer's voice was drowned out. He could have retreated. He could have stayed in America, where he was offered safety. But he returned, because something had changed in him. He no longer believed that intellect alone could save the world. He had seen too much. He had seen intelligence used to justify cruelty. He had seen theology twisted into ideology. He had seen the quiet efficiency of a society that had stopped thinking. And in that silence, he realized something terrifying, that the real danger wasn't hatred. It was stupidity. Not the kind that miscalculates an equation, but the kind that stops asking questions, that repeats what it's told, that trades conscience for comfort. That was the turning point. Bonhoeffer stopped believing that words alone could change things. He joined the resistance. He became part of a plot to assassinate Hitler, not because he was violent, but because he believed that silence had become complicity, and that to remain human, he had to act. It was a tragic irony. A theologian who once believed in sermons, now risking his life for sabotage. A man of peace, caught in a war, not of his choosing. But perhaps that's what makes his story so haunting. He never stopped thinking, even when it hurt, even when it cost him everything. From a prison cell, he wrote some of the most piercing observations on human nature the world has ever known, including this: against stupidity we are defenseless. It was not an insult, it was a warning. He saw what happened when a society overwhelmed by fear traded discernment for obedience. He understood that stupidity, real, dangerous, systemic stupidity, is not a joke. It is a force, a void, a vacuum where conscience used to be, and in that vacuum, anything becomes possible. Even genocide. Even applause for evil, even silence from good people. Bonhoeffer died for what he believed, executed by hanging just weeks before the end of the war. He was 39 years old. His last words, whispered to a fellow prisoner, were these: "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life." He was not afraid, because he knew something we are still struggling to understand. That human dignity begins where intellectual surrender ends, and that even in the darkest moments, our minds, our questions, our conscience are our last defense against collapse. So I ask you, when your time comes to choose between comfort and thought, will you know which side you're on? And if Bonhoeffer stood fast when everyone else fell silent, what's stopping you? If his story moved you, even just a little, comment, "I won't go quiet." Let's honor his life by keeping our minds alive. You probably think of yourself as a decent person, maybe even a thoughtful one. You try to do what's right. You question things. You don't follow blindly. But let me tell you something that might shake you. So did the people in Stanley Milgram's experiment. In 1961, at Yale University, a mild-mannered psychologist invited ordinary people to participate in what they were told was a study on memory. They met a man who looked like a fellow volunteer. They were told to administer electric shocks whenever he gave a wrong answer. And they did. Even when the man screamed in pain. Even when he begged for mercy. Even when he stopped responding altogether. 2/3 of participants continued administering shocks all the way to what they believed was a deadly voltage, because someone in a lab coat told them to, because authority felt more trustworthy than empathy, because the pressure to conform was stronger than the instinct to question. They weren't monsters. They weren't broken. They were human, just like you. And that's what makes this so terrifying. We think morality is about character. But time and time again, experiments show it's about context. Put a good person in a bad system, under enough stress, and they will likely choose obedience over integrity, conformity over courage, and not because they want to do harm, but because they don't want to be the only one who says no. This is what Solomon Asch discovered in the 1950s. In his conformity experiments, he showed people a simple visual task: identify which line matches another. The answer was obvious, but when everyone else in the group gave the wrong answer, 75% of participants also gave the wrong answer at least once. Why? Because being wrong together feels safer than being right alone, because belonging often matters more than truth, and that's the trap. We don't surrender our thinking all at once. We lose it in pieces. We stop speaking up in meetings. We laugh along at things that don't feel right. We click like on ideas we haven't examined, and over time, those small compromises become a habit. That habit becomes a personality. That personality becomes a silence. And in that silence, stupidity grows. Not loud, not chaotic, quiet, comfortable, dangerous. Bonhoeffer saw it happen. He watched decent people stop asking questions. He watched kindness turn to compliance. He watched intelligence become a weapon, used not to challenge lies, but to justify them. And he realized something chilling, that the real threat wasn't hatred. It was people who stopped thinking. Not because they couldn't, but because they chose not to, because thinking was inconvenient, unpopular, painful. And in that space, stupidity, real moral stupidity, takes root. It doesn't feel wrong. It feels normal, expected, just like pressing a button because someone in a white coat told you to. So let me ask you, what's your lab coat? Who do you listen to without question? What belief do you hold just because everyone else does? What story do you tell yourself to stay comfortable? Because the danger isn't that we're too dumb to see the truth. It's that we're too afraid to look. And the psychology of surrender thrives on that fear. So the next time you feel the pressure to stay quiet, the temptation to go along, the voice in your head saying, just don't make it a big deal, remember the people in that experiment. Remember how far they went just to feel safe. And remember, you are always one choice away from becoming someone you wouldn't recognize. If this struck a nerve, if you've ever kept silent when you shouldn't have, comment, I've been there. Because the first step in resisting surrender is admitting how easy it is to fall. What if I told you that stupidity isn't an accident, that it's not just some personal flaw or individual failure, but something that's built into the very systems we live in, that it's not just happening, but being engineered? Take a deep breath, because this might be hard to hear, the kind of functional stupidity Bonhoeffer warned us about. It's not a glitch, it's a feature. Let's start with something simple. You wake up, you check your phone. Within 30 seconds, you're scrolling past headlines, images, opinions, outrage. You don't remember clicking anything, but you're already being pulled, not toward truth, but toward reaction. That's not a coincidence, it's design. Social media platforms are built to keep you engaged, not informed, engaged. And what keeps people engaged isn't nuance. It's emotion, it's certainty, it's the kind of content that makes you feel right and someone else feel wrong. Because the longer you stay angry, the longer you stay online. And the longer you stay online, the more ads you see. So the system doesn't ask, is this true? It asks, will you click? That's why false information spreads 6 times faster than truth on Twitter. That's why the most emotionally charged posts, outrage, fear, ridicule, get the most engagement. The algorithm isn't evil. It's indifferent. It doesn't care if you're smart or foolish, kind or cruel. It cares if you're scrolling. And in that indifference, stupidity flourishes. But it's not just online. Think about your workplace. How often do people speak up when they know something's wrong? How often do meetings reward thoughtful dissent versus eager agreement? How often do systems prioritize truth over efficiency? We live in structures that reward obedience, that punish ambiguity, that elevate speed over depth, that promote slogans over substance. And then we wonder why no one thinks anymore. Bonhoeffer called it out in 1943. He saw that stupidity doesn't grow in isolation. It grows in systems that reward silence, in institutions that reward appearance over truth, in economies that make questioning too expensive. And today, that pressure is everywhere. We're told to keep up, to stay productive, to post more, to feel certain. But here's the truth. When you're working 3 jobs, drowning in notifications and constantly exhausted, you don't have time to think deeply. You don't have space to question. So, what do? You outsource your thinking to whatever voice feels loudest, whatever story feels safest, whatever answer comes fastest. And that's the trap. Stupidity becomes not just common, it becomes rational. Because in a system designed for reaction, contemplation is a liability. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility, because the systems won't change themselves. They're too profitable, too efficient, too entrenched, and if we wait for them to make thinking easier, we'll be waiting forever. So the question becomes, how do we resist stupidity that's been built into the world around us? We start by noticing the design, by recognizing that every time we scroll, every time we react, every time we seek comfort instead of clarity, we're participating in something that doesn't just exploit our minds, it erases them. We start by making thought an act of rebellion, and that begins with one radical move: slowing down, pausing, asking, why do I believe this? Who benefits if I don't question it? What would it cost me to think this through? Because the moment we ask those questions, the system begins to crack, even if just a little, even if just for a moment. And in that crack, we remember what it feels like to be human again, not a machine, not a puppet, a human. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the noise, comment, I'm slowing down. Let's remind each other that clarity starts with courage. This might be the hardest truth of all. Smart people are often the easiest to fool, not because they lack intelligence, but because they trust it too much. They mistake cleverness for clarity. They confuse quick thinking with deep understanding. And worst of all, they believe their minds are immune. But Bonhoeffer saw the opposite. He watched as professors, doctors, theologians, the brightest minds of his generation, became the most vocal defenders of evil. Why? Because intelligence, without humility, becomes arrogance, and arrogance is fertile ground for stupidity. Here's how it happens. A smart person hears a theory that aligns with their values. They feel an emotional resonance. Their brain whispers, this makes sense. Then instead of testing it, they defend it. They build intellectual scaffolding around an emotional impulse. They use logic not to discover truth, but to justify what they already feel. It's not stupidity in the traditional sense. It's something worse. It's a kind of intellectual blindness, wrapped in confidence. Leon Festinger called it cognitive dissonance. When people are faced with information that contradicts their beliefs, the brain doesn't go, time to reevaluate. It goes into war mode. It attacks the new information. It rewrites memories. It finds reasons to stay comfortable. And the smarter the person, the better they are at doing this. They don't lose debates. They win them for the wrong side. Because they're not looking for truth. They're looking to feel right. That's how functional stupidity operates. It's not loud. It doesn't scream, I'm wrong. It whispers, I've got this figured out. And here's where it gets even darker. Our brains were never built for truth. They were built for survival, for speed, for familiarity. We evolved to trust what feels good. what feels normal. So when algorithms feed us stories that confirm our biases, we don't resist. We click, we share. We sink deeper into a digital echo chamber where everything we already believe feels more and more correct, until doubt becomes betrayal and curiosity becomes a threat. Bonhoeffer didn't have words like algorithm or confirmation bias, but he knew what he was seeing. He saw intelligent people become mouthpieces for madness, not because they lacked reason, but because they refused discomfort. They chose loyalty over logic, belonging over integrity, and in doing so, they became dangerous. So let me ask you, what belief do you hold that you haven't tested? What truth do you defend without ever questioning where it came from? What information do you ignore simply because it feels wrong? Not because it is wrong, but because it makes you uncomfortable. That's where it starts. That's where smart people lose their minds. Not through ignorance, but through emotional certainty. Through the seductive lie that if I feel this strongly, I must be right. And the only antidote is humility, intellectual humility, the willingness to say, I might be wrong, the strength to ask, what would change my mind, the courage to seek out the smartest arguments from people you disagree with. Not to win, not to destroy, but to understand, because understanding isn't weakness, it's resistance. And in a world that profits from our mental shortcuts, choosing to think slowly, to question deeply, to hold uncertainty with grace, is an act of rebellion. So here's your challenge. Before you share the next article, watch the next clip. Repeat the next slogan. Pause. Ask yourself, do I know this, or do I just want it to be true? If that hit you in the chest, even a little, comment, I'm questioning it. Let's build a community not of answers, but of people who are still willing to ask. Let's be honest, thinking is hard, not the kind of thinking that solves puzzles or writes clever tweets, the kind that unsettles you, the kind that makes you question your heroes, your tribe, even yourself. That kind of thinking, it's painful, uncomfortable, and in today's world it's rare. But Bonhoeffer believed something powerful. He believed that true resistance doesn't begin with guns or protests. It begins with thought, with the refusal to go numb, with the daily difficult practice of intellectual integrity. He called it costly grace, the willingness to hold fast to what's right, even when it costs you, even when no one else is watching. So how do we practice that? How do we train ourselves to resist the pull of functional stupidity? Let me offer you 4 daily practices. Small things, but powerful. The first is this: practice intellectual friction. Once a week, read or watch something by someone who disagrees with you, thoughtfully, not a straw man, not a caricature, a smart, good-faith person who sees the world differently. And don't rush to debate. Sit with it. Ask, what's the strongest point they're making? You don't have to change your mind, but you have to test it. Because untested beliefs aren't convictions. They're habits. The second practice, embrace productive ignorance. When you feel absolutely certain about something, pause. Ask, what evidence would change my mind? If your answer is nothing, that's not a belief. That's a blindfold, and intellectual humility means being brave enough to take it off. The third practice, slow down your sharing. Before you post, retweet, or forward that video, take 60 seconds, check the source. Ask yourself, am I sharing this because it's true, or because it makes me feel something? That pause, it breaks the cycle, it interrupts the algorithm, it makes space for clarity. The final practice is the simplest and the hardest. Say, I don't know. When someone asks something and you're unsure, don't guess. Don't bluff. Say it. I don't know. There is power in that phrase. It's honest, it's rare, it's human. And in a culture that rewards confident ignorance over humble truth, admitting what you don't know is an act of quiet revolution, These practices won't make you famous. They won't get you trending, but they'll keep your mind yours. And that matters more than ever. Because the systems we live in, they want you to surrender, to click faster, to scroll harder, to outsource your thinking to whatever voice is loudest. But your mind is not a commodity, it's a sanctuary, and it deserves your protection. Bonhoeffer gave his life to defend that. We can give 5 minutes a day, so here's your invitation. Pick one of these practices, just one. Try it for the next 7 days, see what happens. Maybe nothing changes, maybe everything does. But either way, you'll know that you're not just reacting, you're resisting, you're reclaiming your most human gift, the capacity to think freely. And that's how we begin to change the world. If you're in, if you're willing to try, comment, "I'm practicing." Let's not just believe in critical thinking, let's build a habit of it. Together. April 9th, 1945. The war was nearly over, Germany was collapsing, and in a prison camp in Flossenburg, a man was led from his cell. Thin, calm, defiant in silence, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, pastor, theologian, resistor. He had been arrested for his role in a plot to assassinate Hitler, and now the price would be paid. He had written his final words just days earlier. "This is the end, for me, the beginning of life." And then they hanged him, his body broken, but his mind unbowed. And with his death, a question was left behind, a question that still echoes, still demands an answer. Who stands fast when the world rewards silence, when lies are easier than truth, when stupidity feels safer than thinking? Who stands fast? Not the loudest, not the smartest, not the ones with power, the ones with conscience, the ones who refuse to go numb, the ones who say no, even when that no comes with consequences. This is the heart of Bonhoeffer's warning, that stupidity is not a joke. It's not harmless, it's not a meme, it's the mask evil wears when it no longer needs to hide. It's the voice that whispers, "Go along. Don't make it difficult. Don't think too much." And the moment we obey, the damage is done, not just to the world, to us. Because every time we surrender our mind for comfort, we lose a piece of our humanity. Bonhoeffer saw this, he felt it, he fought it, and in the end, he died for it. But here's what makes his story so powerful. He didn't just resist out there. He resisted in here, in his soul, in his thoughts. In the way he refused to believe that certainty was strength, he believed that real strength is staying awake, staying honest, staying human, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. And now, that responsibility falls to us. Because we are living in a world he never could have imagined, a world of AI, deepfakes, and algorithmic manipulation, a world where lies spread faster than light, a world where thinking has become optional, and in that world, who stands fast, who slows down when everyone's rushing, who listens when everyone's shouting, who asks questions when everyone else has found an answer. Maybe you think you're not brave enough. Maybe you think you're not smart enough, but that's not what it takes. It takes commitment to curiosity, to humility, to quiet courage. It takes the daily decision to stay conscious, to think when thinking is costly, to feel when feeling is inconvenient, to question when silence would be easier. You don't have to be a hero, you just have to begin. And every time you choose awareness over ease, truth over tribalism, thought over instinct, you are answering Bonhoeffer's question. You are standing fast. So I ask you now, when that moment comes, when comfort tempts, when the crowd sways, when the cost is high, will you stand fast? Will you remember his life, his warning, his final challenge? If your answer is yes, even in a whisper, comment, "I'll stand fast." Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs minds that won't be moved. You wouldn't try to run a marathon without training. You wouldn't lift 200 pounds without warming up. But every day, we expect ourselves to navigate a storm of information, emotion, and manipulation. without ever training our minds. That's the flaw. We think critical thinking is something we're born with, or not, but it's not. And just like your body, if you don't use it, it atrophies, it weakens. Bonhoeffer understood this, even if he didn't use the word. He knew that staying human in an inhuman world required discipline. Not the kind that obeys orders, the kind that says, wait, who benefits from me reacting this way? That kind of pause, that's resistant every day. When you're scrolling and something makes you angry, pause. Don't share, don't comment, don't react. Ask yourself, is this making me think or just making me feel? That's a rep. That's strength training. When you hear something that confirms what you already believe, ask yourself, what's the best argument against this? If you can't find one, you're not thinking, you're nesting. It grows in tension because the work of humility feels like weakness at first. It feels like doubt, but it's actually the beginning of real confidence. Confidence not built on slogans or likes, on resilience. Most people won't do this, not because they're bad. It's tiring, but that's what makes it powerful. Bonhoeffer trained this muscle until the end, in a prison cell, still thinking, still refusing to go numb. That is the strength of humility, not in a day, a commitment to staying intellectually alive. So here's your prompt for this week. And research the strongest, most thoughtful argument against it. Don't do it to change your mind, because that's what muscles do, and in that tension, they grow. So the next time you're tempted to react, the next time a headline makes you feel smug or righteous or furious, ask yourself, or just louder, that's the work. You become harder to fool and stronger, not just for yourself, but because your clarity, it's a beacon, and in a world drowning in noise. So lift. If you're training your mind this week, drop a comment, strengthening the muscle. Let's remind the world that intellectual humility isn't weakness. It's the core of our strength. Certainty feels good. It feels strong, safe, complete, like closing a door on confusion, like planting your feet on solid ground. But here's the truth we rarely say out loud. Certainty has a cost, and most of us are paying it without realizing. Because every time we choose certainty over curiosity, we lose something. We lose connection. We lose growth. We lose our capacity to change. Certainty whispers, you've arrived, but growth whispers, keep walking, and you can't walk when you're standing still. Bonhoeffer saw this up close. He watched a nation fall in love with certainty, certainty that their race was superior, certainty that their leader was chosen, certainty that dissent was betrayal, and that certainty, it made atrocities possible, not just because it was wrong, but because it felt so right. That's the trap. Stupidity doesn't come with a warning label. It comes with a sense of righteousness, of moral clarity, of finally understanding everything. And when that feeling takes over, you stop listening. You stop learning. You stop being human. Because to be human is to wonder, to doubt, to live inside questions. Not to be paralyzed by them, but to be humbled by them. To let them soften you, open you. Certainty slams the door, curiosity leaves it ajar. And here's what no one tells you. That space of not knowing, it's sacred. It's where empathy lives, where nuance breathes, where transformation begins. But most of us are terrified of that space, because it feels like weakness, like confusion, like failure. And so we grasp for certainty. We repeat what feels familiar. We cling to what our tribe believes. We armor ourselves with answers. But armor doesn't just protect you. It isolates you. It weighs you down. It keeps the world out. Bonhoeffer refused that armor, even as he faced prison, even as he faced death. He let himself remain open to contradiction, to complexity, to faith that asked more questions than it answered. And that is real strength, not certainty, but courage. Courage to say, I'm still learning. I might be wrong. I'm listening. So here's what I want to ask you. What belief have you armored yourself with because the alternative felt too vulnerable? Where have you chosen certainty, not because it's true, but because it's safe? That's where the work is. That's where your next growth lives, not in knowing more, but in needing to know less. In holding what you believe with gentle hands, not to throw it away, but to examine it, test it, let it breathe, because if it's real, it'll survive the scrutiny. And if it's not, then you've just taken a step closer to truth. And that's worth everything. If you've ever let go of a belief you once clung to, comment, "I grew." Let's normalize the courage it takes to leave certainty behind and to step into something far more powerful, wisdom. You made it. Through discomfort, through doubt, through story after story of how easy it is and to stop thinking. But here's the most important thing I can tell you now. If you're still here, if you're still questioning, if you're still willing to sit in that place between I am sure and I am not sure anymore, then you're already resisting. You're already doing what Bonhoeffer believed was the foundation of freedom, remaining human. Because that's what this entire journey has been about. Not proving a point, not defeating an enemy, but reclaiming your own mind in a world that wants to buy, bend, and break it. A world that profits from your outrage, that rewards your conformity, that punishes your reflection. And yet, here you are, still thinking, still feeling, still choosing the harder path. That matters. It matters more than likes, more than arguments, more than clever comments. Because thinking carefully, loving truth more than comfort, is one of the last radical acts we have left. Bonhoeffer knew that. He lived it, he died for it, and now the question he left us with becomes yours. When the pressure to conform is overwhelming, when the cost of truth feels too high, will you stand fast? Will you stay curious? Will you keep asking? Will you dare to say, "I don't know," when everyone else is shouting? That's the quiet rebellion we need. Not louder opinions, but deeper thought. Not more information, but more wisdom, and it begins every time with a question. So here's mine for you. What's one belief you're willing to question this week? Not to abandon it, but to test it, to train your muscle, to strengthen your mind, to honor the people who stood fast when no one else would. Drop your belief in the comments. Tell me what you're questioning, and if you know someone who's brave enough to do the same, share this video, because maybe, just maybe, in a world where stupidity is designed, the most revolutionary thing we can do is to think carefully, together. If this journey touched you, even in a quiet place you rarely show, comment "still thinking," because that's where it all begins, not with answers, but with the courage to ask.